3 generations of my family worked the Blackwater Ridge Wildlife Management Area in western North Carolina. I want to say that clearly at the start, because it matters for everything that follows. This was not a job one of us stumbled into. It was a lineage, a trade passed down the way some families pass down carpentry or medicine. My grandfather, Earl Hollis, started in 1961. He was 24 years old, fresh out of the Army, and looking for work that kept him outdoors. He served Blackwater Ridge for 28 years until his retirement in 1989. In that time, he maintained trails, ran campground operations, coordinated with the Forest Service on prescribed burns, and spent more nights alone in a ranger cabin than most people spend in their own bedrooms across a lifetime. My father, Thomas Hollis, started in 1984 while my grandfather was still active. They overlapped for 5 years. My father served until 2012. 28 years, same as his father. Same district, same 90-mile section of trail system, same cabin some nights, same radio frequencies, same fire roads. I started in 2007. Caleb Hollis, 3rd generation. I served 11 years before I left in 2018. Between the 3 of us, we covered 57 years of continuous service in one district. That kind of continuity is rare anywhere in the park system. It meant we knew the land the way you know the rooms in your house by feel, by memory, by the way light falls at certain hours in certain seasons. None of us were dramatic men. I want to be clear about that because it will matter later. My grandfather documented everything in shorthand and never embellished. My father spoke about incidents the way a mechanic talks about engine trouble. Here's what happened. Here's what I did. Here's the outcome. I inherited that temperament. We were documentation men, report writers. We believed in what we could observe, measure, and file. That's what makes our shared silence about one trail so difficult to explain. 3 generations of practical, skeptical men, all avoiding the same 2-mile connector path, none of us willing to fully say why. Spur 17 on the Blackwater Ridge Trail system is officially designated the Kettle Creek Connector. It runs 2.3 miles between the main ridge trail at the top and the lower campground loop at the bottom. It descends approximately 800 feet in elevation through dense rhododendron, crosses Kettle Creek twice on simple log bridges, and passes through one of the deeper hollows on the eastern side of the management area. On paper, it is unremarkable, a connector trail, the kind of thing that exists in every park system, a link between 2 more popular routes, used primarily by hikers who want a shorter loop option or who are heading down to the lake access from the ridge. The terrain is moderate. The footing is decent. The creek crossings are straightforward, except during spring runoff. It appears on every public trail map of Blackwater Ridge. It has trail markers at both ends. It is not posted as closed. There is no gate across it. No warning sign. No seasonal restriction. Any visitor can walk it at any time. But if you look at the patrol schedules at the district office, and I looked at them extensively during my years there, you will notice something consistent. Spur 17 is only assigned morning patrol slots, 7 a.m. to noon, never afternoon, never evening. This pattern holds in every archived schedule I could access, going back to 1987. No memo explains why. No policy document addresses it. No supervisor ever issued a written directive about the scheduling. It simply is the way it has always been. Hikers walk it at all hours. They come down off the ridge at 4 in the afternoon, at 6 in the evening, at whatever time suits their itinerary. Nobody stops them. Nobody warns them. But rangers, the people who know the trail system best, who have spent years walking every foot of it, treat Spur 17 differently than every other path in the network. We check it in the morning. We leave it alone after that. And until my 8th year on the job, I never seriously questioned why. I asked my father about Spur 17 during my first summer as a full-time ranger. It was August 2007. I was 22, still learning the rhythm of the work, still figuring out which questions were welcome and which weren't. We were driving the fire road back to the station after a campground check. I mentioned that I'd noticed the scheduling pattern, asked if there was a reason Spur 17 only got morning coverage. My father kept his eyes on the road. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he said, "We don't walk that trail after the light changes." I waited for more. An explanation. A story. Something practical I could file under policy, or safety, or bear activity, or drainage patterns. Nothing came. I pushed. Asked what he meant by the light changes. Asked if there had been an incident. Asked if it was a wildlife thing, or a terrain thing, or a liability thing. He looked at me then. Not angry. Not dismissive. Something closer to tired. "Your grandfather said it best," he told me. "Don't go looking for what answers you." I'd heard that phrase before. Growing up, it was a family saying, something my grandfather would mutter when the news showed a story about someone poking around where they shouldn't. I'd always taken it as folksy Appalachian caution. Mind your own business. Don't borrow trouble. Sitting in that truck at 22, I accepted my father's non-answer, the way you accept a lot of things from your parents when you're young. You file it away. You assume you'll understand later. I accepted it for 7 years. I followed the scheduling pattern. I treated Spur 17 as a morning trail. I didn't push. I didn't investigate. I was a good Hollis man, following a rule I didn't understand. Then something happened in my 8th year that made passive acceptance impossible. Something I couldn't file away or leave unexamined. Something that required me to decide whether I was going to keep following a rule I'd never been given a reason for, or whether I was going to find out what 3 generations of my family had been walking around. I found out. And I understand now why they chose silence. Blackwater Ridge Wildlife Management Area covers approximately 47,000 acres of southern Appalachian terrain. Hardwood forest below 4,000 feet, oak, hickory, tulip poplar, spruce fir at the higher elevations, rhododendron so thick in the hollows that midday looks like twilight in some places. Granite balds above the tree line where you can see 3 counties on a clear morning. The park operates with a small, permanent staff, 2 full-time rangers, 1 maintenance coordinator, and seasonal hires during summer and hunting season. There are 6 maintained trail loops, totaling roughly 90 miles, 2 developed campground areas with a combined 42 sites, 14 backcountry camping zones, one staffed ranger station at the main entrance, and a network of fire roads connecting the drainage systems. My daily work was the work of every backcountry ranger. Permit checks at trailheads, campground patrols, bear locker inspections, trail condition assessments after storms, bridge checks after heavy rain, visitor contacts on popular routes, maintenance coordination with the county, radio check-ins with dispatch, incident documentation when something required it. Most days were quiet. That's the thing so don't understand about ranger work. The vast majority of it is routine maintenance and visitor management. You're checking fire rings for improper disposal. You're reminding people about food storage. You're noting deadfall locations for the maintenance crew. You're replacing torn trail signs and clearing drainage culverts. It's not adventure. It's stewardship. Quiet, repetitive, necessary stewardship. I mention this because the normalcy matters. When I describe the things that weren't normal, I need you to understand them against the backdrop of 1,000 ordinary days. 1,000 mornings of boot leather on gravel, permit stamps, radio clicks, and nothing worth remembering. One thing I noticed early: Blackwater Ridge had unusually low staff turnover for a remote posting. People who worked there tended to stay. At the time, I thought that was a good sign. A healthy workplace, good management. I thought that for a long time. Rangers share information at shift change that never appears in official logs. This is true at every park I've ever heard of. But it was especially true at Blackwater Ridge. You'd come in for morning shift, and the night ranger, or the previous day's closer, would be finishing paperwork at the desk. You'd get the basics first. Any incidents, any maintenance flags, any weather changes, any problem campers. Standard handoff. But then there was the other layer, the informal layer. The things said while pulling on a jacket or rinsing a coffee mug. Things like, bears working Loop C again, stay upwind near Site 38. Or, repeaters glitchy on the South Channel, use north if you need dispatch. Or, creeks up at the third crossing, might want boots not shoes. These were practical, professional, just experienced people saving each other time. Among these practical tips, I began noticing consistent language around Spur 17. Nobody ever said, "Don't go there." That would be too explicit. Instead, I heard phrases that performed the same function without the directness. Already checked this morning. Said at 7:45 a.m. by someone who started at 7. Morning trail. Said by Dale Purcell when a seasonal hire suggested an afternoon route that would have included the connector. All clear on 17, said preemptively before anyone asked, as if closing the subject before it opened. The seasonal hires never seemed to notice the pattern. They rotated through in 4-month blocks, never staying long enough to see the consistency. But if you worked there year-round, and you paid attention, you could see it clearly. The language around Spur 17 was managed, gently, consistently, by people who never discussed the management itself. I watched Dale Purcell once correct a new hire's suggested patrol route. The hire wanted to loop down Spur 17 in the afternoon to check the register box and then come back up the east connector. Dale said, "Spur 17's a morning trail. Always has been." His voice was casual, friendly, final. The seasonal hire didn't ask why. People rarely do when the instruction comes with that particular tone. In the summer of 2009, the district held a cookout at the main campground, a staff appreciation thing. Burgers and beer, families invited. Gus Weatherford was there. Gus had been the maintenance coordinator for Blackwater Ridge from 1986 to 2008. 22 years of trail clearing, bridge repair, sign replacement, culvert work. He knew every foot of the system from a structural perspective. I was standing near the grill with him, talking about nothing in particular, when he said something I've never forgotten. You ever notice Spur 17 never needs clearing? I hadn't, not consciously, but as soon as he said it, I realized he was right. 22 years I worked here, Gus said. Every other trail in the system gets blowdown. Every one. You get a storm in March, you spend April with a chainsaw. That's the job. But Spur 17, he shook his head, never once had to cut a tree off that trail. Not once. I asked if maybe the tree spacing was different there. Maybe the hollow was sheltered from wind. The hollow's sheltered from crosswind, Gus said. But trees don't just fall from wind. They fall from rot, from ice loading, from root failure. They fall everywhere. Everywhere, except that trail. He said it lightly, the way you'd mention a curiosity. But his eyes stayed on me a beat longer than casual, and then he looked away and changed the subject. That week, I checked the maintenance work orders in the filing system. Every trail in the district had entries dates of clearing, crew assignments, equipment used, hours logged. Some trails had dozens of entries per year. Spur 17 had none. Not zero for the current year. 0 total. The trail appeared on the maintenance schedule. It was listed as a maintained path. But no work order had ever been completed for it. No chainsaw hours, no crew assignments, no blowdown clearing. Nothing. As if the trail maintained itself. I thought about Gus's comment for a long time. Trees fall everywhere in an Appalachian forest. It's one of the few absolute certainties of the job. Every trail gets blocked. Every trail needs clearing. Except one. The September afternoon that changed things started with a bear locker. Site 23 on the upper loop had a locker with a damaged hinge. The door wouldn't seal fully, and a black bear had been working the campgrounds that week. I spent 40 minutes on the repair, which put me behind schedule on my afternoon patrol circuit. By the time I reached the junction where the ridge trail meets the top of Spur 17, it was 5:40 p.m., late September in the mountains. Sunset was around 7:15, but the hollow below was already filling with shadow. The light was that deep amber color it gets when the sun drops behind the western ridge, long horizontal rays cutting through the canopy. Everything gold on one side and dark blue on the other. The light was changing. I knew the family rule. I could feel it in my gut, the way you feel the edge of a prohibition you followed without question for years. But there was a practical problem. The trail register box at the Kettle Creek lower crossing hadn't been checked in 3 weeks. That was my job. Register checks were part of the weekly rotation, and somehow Spur 17's register had been skipped 3 cycles running. I didn't check who was responsible for the oversight. Looking back, I suspect no one had volunteered. I stood at the junction for maybe 30 seconds, doing the calculation. 2.3 miles down, 45 minutes if I moved fast. I'd reach the register box before the light got truly dim. I'd turn around immediately and be back at the ridge before full dark. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was being irrational. Following a family superstition without any evidence, it was anything more than old man caution. I stepped onto Spur 17. The rhododendron closed overhead within the first quarter mile. That's not unusual for Spur 17. The trail cuts through one of the densest rhododendron thickets in the district. A tunnel of waxy green leaves and gnarled branches that blocks most of the sky even at midday. In the late afternoon, it was dim enough that I considered switching on my headlamp. I didn't. There was still enough ambient light to see the trail clearly. The path dropped steadily. The grade was moderate, maybe 15%, switchbacking down the slope towards the creek drainage below. I could hear Kettle Creek getting louder as I descended. The sound built gradually, the way mountain creeks do, first a whisper of white noise, then the distinct sound of water moving over rock. I noticed something as I walked that I didn't fully process until later. The silence. Not total silence, the creek was there, building. But everything else had stopped. No birds, no insects, no rustle of squirrels in the understory. In September, these mountains should have been alive with evening sounds, wood thrushes, katydids, the scatter of chipmunks gathering for the season change. I heard none of it. I told myself it was the time of day, the transition hour, animals settling in, a reasonable explanation that I mostly believed. I reached the register box at the lower creek crossing at 6:15. A simple wooden box on a post, hinged lid, waterproofed with a sheet metal cap. I opened it. The register sheets inside showed the last entry dated August 27th, 22 days prior. Before that, entries every few days through the summer. Normal use from day hikers, but 3 weeks of nothing on a connector trail between two popular routes. In peak season, that was unusual. I signed the register myself, noted the date, my initials, my role, closed the box. I turned to head back up. That's when I heard it. 3 sharp notes, high and clear. The unmistakable sound of a rescue whistle. 1 second on, 1 second off, 3 times, the standard distress pattern. I stopped moving and oriented immediately. Training took over before thought did. Sound bearing, east-northeast. Elevation, above me, maybe 200 feet higher. Distance, hard to judge in a hollow, but close, within a quarter mile. I marked the direction mentally and checked the terrain. East-northeast from where I stood, above me by 200 feet. That put the sound source at Kettle Wall. A 200-foot sheer granite exposure that forms the eastern boundary of the hollow. No trail accesses it from any direction. No climbing route is established there. The rock face is near vertical, fractured in places, covered in lichen and moss. In 20-plus years of district records, no climber has ever registered a permit for that wall. No one should have been there. No one could have been there without technical rope gear. And even then, they would have needed to approach from above a bushwhack through unmarked terrain with no trail, no access road, and no reason to attempt it. I waited, listened. The creak sound filled the space between. 5 seconds? 10. I called out. Standard voice response, the way we're trained. Ranger on trail. State your location. Nothing. The hollow held my voice and gave back nothing but water sound. I waited 60 seconds. Called again. Same words. Same silence in response. The whistle had been perfect. Not a bird. Not a branch scraping. A manufactured whistle, the kind every hiker carries on their pack strap. 3 blasts at regulation intervals. The exact pattern we teach in every wilderness safety course the district offers. Something on that cliff face, or near it, had produced a textbook distress signal, and then had not responded to a human voice answering it. I radioed dispatch, reported a possible distress signal, bearing east-northeast from the Kettle Creek lower crossing. Dispatch confirmed no active permits for the drainage. No overdue hikers reported in the area. Search coordination asked if I could access the cliff base to investigate. I looked at the light. The hollow was nearly dark now. The amber glow that had filtered through the rhododendron canopy was gone, replaced by a blue-gray dimness that was minutes from becoming full dark. I told dispatch I could not safely access the cliff base in current light conditions. I recommended a daylight search team for the following morning. Dispatch acknowledged. I hiked out. The climb back up Spur 17 took 38 minutes. I walked faster than I needed to. Not running, just efficient, motivated. I kept my headlamp on and my eyes on the trail ahead. And I did not look back toward Kettle Wall. At the ridge junction, I stopped and listened. Nothing. Just the normal night sounds, starting up an owl somewhere west, the faint wind in the ridgetop spruce, the biological silence of the hollow was behind me. The normal world was here, at the top, as if nothing below the ridgeline had changed. The morning search found nothing. A team of 4 swept the base of Kettle Wall, checked for climbing anchors, looked for boot prints, gear, any sign of human presence. Nothing. The rock face showed no disturbance, no chalk marks, no rope abrasion, no tracks in the leaf litter at the base. The incident report was filed as unverified auditory contact, possible wildlife or acoustic anomaly. A reasonable official conclusion. Sound does strange things in hollows. Granite reflects it. Creek noise masks direction. A bird call at the right frequency, at the right distance, could potentially sound like a whistle pattern. I let myself accept that explanation for about 2 weeks. It was comfortable and technical, and it asked nothing of me. Then I mentioned it to my father, casually, over Sunday dinner. Told him I'd heard something on Spur 17 that sounded like a whistle. 3 blasts. He set his fork down. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me in the truck 2 years earlier. That same specific tiredness. Your grandfather heard it in 74, he said. Logged it. Same hollow. Same wall. Same 3 blasts. He picked up his fork again. That should tell you something about what you heard. 35 years. Same sound. Same impossible location. Same nothing found. I didn't bring it up again, but I stopped telling myself it was a bird. After the whistle incident, I developed a quiet habit. Every Monday morning, I checked the Spur 17 register box, early, before 8. I'd hike down to the lower crossing, pull the sheet, note the entries, and replace it with a fresh page. For a year, the entries were normal. a handful each week during summer, fewer in fall, almost none in winter. Day hikers heading between the Ridge Trail and the lower loop. Names, dates, party sizes, destinations, standard register data. October 2010. I pulled the September sheet. 11 entries for the month. That was already unusual. September typically showed 4 to 6 for that trail. But the number wasn't what stopped me. 8 of the 11 entries included overnight camping intentions, backcountry zone numbers, multi-day trip plans, the kind of detail that requires a backcountry permit. I drove back to the station and ran the 8 names through our permit system. 5 returned no results, no permits issued under those names for Blackwater Ridge in any active database. That was mildly concerning, but not inexplicable. People camp without permits. It happens. Rangers issue warnings, sometimes citations. It's an enforcement issue, not a mystery. But 3 of the names returned results. Active permits, matching the names exactly. The problem was the dates. The permits were from 1996, 2001, and 2004. Not current permits. Permits issued 6, 9, 14 years prior. To people who had visited the park years ago. Their names were now appearing on a September 2010 register sheet, as if they had walked that trail last month. I sat at the station desk, looking at the permit records on the screen, the cursor blinking. The match was exact same spelling, same formatting. These weren't common names being coincidentally reused. One was hyphenated, one had an unusual spelling. The matches were specific. I told myself someone could be using old permits, reusing a friend's documentation. There were explanations, thin ones, but they existed. Then I cross-referenced one more thing, and the thin explanations broke. I pulled the original permit cards from the file archive. Physical cards, handwritten by the permit holders at the time of registration. We kept them in filing cabinets by year. The 1996 card, the 2001 card, the 2004 card. I compared the handwriting on the permit cards to the handwriting on the September register sheet. 2 comparisons were inconclusive, similar, but not definitively matching. Different pens, different conditions. You can't make a firm comparison without forensic tools. The 3rd comparison stopped me. The name from 1996. A woman named Elaine Vickers-Hahn. The hyphenated name. Her permit card from October 1996 showed a distinctive handwriting trait. She crossed her lowercase t very low on the vertical stroke, nearly at the baseline rather than the midpoint. An unusual habit. The register entry from September 2010, 14 years later, showed the same low T-cross, same proportion, same angle, same relationship between the crossbar and the vertical. I am not a handwriting expert. I have no certification in document comparison, but I have eyes, and the similarity was strong enough to make me look up what happened to Elaine Vickers-Hahn after her October 1996 visit to Blackwater Ridge. She didn't leave the park. Elaine Vickers-Hahn was reported missing on October 19, 1996, after failing to return to her vehicle at the East Trailhead. Her permit indicated a 3-night backcountry stay in Zone 7, which is accessed via Spur 17. Search and rescue was activated October 20th. Her tent was found at her registered site, properly staked, rain fly attached, sleeping bag laid out, personal items inside. No sign of disturbance. She was never found. The case remains open. No remains, no evidence, no explanation. And 14 years after she disappeared, her name appeared on the Spur 17 register in handwriting that matched her own. As if she had simply walked through again, signed in, continued on her way. The other two names, I checked them next. The 2001 name matched a hiker who completed his trip without incident. No mystery there. The 2004 name matched a permit holder reported missing from a backcountry site in Blackwater Ridge in September 2004. Also never found. Two names, two missing persons, both appearing on a register sheet 14 and 6 years after they vanished. I brought the register sheets to my father's house on a Sunday, spread them on his kitchen table alongside the permit cards and the missing persons references I'd printed from the system. He looked at them for a long time, his reading glasses on, his fingers not touching the papers, just his eyes moving across them, back and forth between the register and the permit cards. He didn't seem surprised. That was the detail that bothered me most. He didn't seem surprised. Your grandfather found the same thing, he said finally. Different names, same situation. We stopped checking the box for a reason. I asked what my grandfather had concluded, what explanation he'd settled on. My father took off his glasses, folded them slowly, set them on the table. He concluded that some things sign in, but never sign out, he said. And we don't need to know more than that. I sat with that sentence. It was the most my father had ever said about Spur 17. It was also the least helpful answer I could imagine. I pushed further, asked if the grandfather had reported it, filed anything official. He removed the register box in '83, my father said. District put a new one in during the '85 trail audit. Standard inventory check. Every trail gets a register. He refused to check it after that, so I checked it. For a while. Then I stopped too. He gathered the papers from the table and handed them back to me. His eyes held mine, and there was something there, not fear, something closer to sympathy. You'll stop too, he said, when you've seen enough. That conversation was when I understood how the family rule grew. It wasn't written down anywhere. It wasn't handed to me as a complete document. It accumulated. Each generation encountered something, added a behavioral restriction, and passed it forward without full context. My grandfather. Don't walk the trail after the light changes. My father, adding, don't read the register closely. Don't cross-reference the names. And now, my father was giving me one more. Don't read the names out loud. Don't say them. Collect the sheets, file them. Don't look closely. I noticed the specificity of that instruction. Don't read them out loud. As if silent awareness was acceptable, but vocalization was not. As if there were gradients to attention, levels of engagement. And some levels were safer than others. I asked why. Why not out loud specifically? He didn't answer. He walked to the kitchen and started making coffee, and the conversation was over. I drove home that evening with the papers on my passenger seat, and a new rule added to the family's informal protocol. Don't read the names out loud. I didn't understand it. I didn't have a reason for it. I followed it anyway, because that's what Hollis men do with Spur 17 rules. We follow them. We don't explain them. We accumulate them. But I want to be honest about what I did next, because I was not as obedient as my father or grandfather. I was the third generation, the one with trail cameras and digital databases, and the stubborn belief that technology could answer what silence could not. I installed a camera, and I watched. In early March, before the spring hiking season started, I installed a Reconix HC600 trail camera on a hemlock tree 12 feet from the Spur 17 register box. Standard unit. Motion-activated infrared sensor with a 2-second trigger delay. Night-capable. Weather-proofed housing. I positioned it at chest height, aimed directly at the register box. Tested the angle with 3 approach walks from different directions each time, confirming the sensor field covered the full area around the post. Took reference photos to verify the box was centered in frame. I used a Python lock cable to secure the unit to the tree. Standard anti-theft measure. Nothing unusual about a trail camera at a register location. We used them elsewhere in the park for wildlife monitoring and occasional vandalism documentation. I felt good about it. Rational. This was problem solving. Someone or something was signing that register. A camera would show me who. Simple. Direct. The kind of answer technology is supposed to provide. I left the camera running and drove back to the station. I would check it in 2 weeks when I pulled the next register sheet. 2 weeks of continuous monitoring. If anything approached that box, human, animal, anything the sensor would trigger, and the camera would document it. I told myself I was being thorough, professional, applying available tools to an open question. I did not tell my father. 2 weeks later, I hiked down in the morning and pulled the SD card, replaced it with a fresh one, collected the register sheet 3 entries, all matching day-use visitors who'd checked in at the trailhead. Normal. Back at the station, I loaded the card. 14 images total. 12 were wildlife, 3 deer, a red fox at night, 1 young black bear passing through the sensor field at 3 a.m. Typical Appalachian fauna. All clearly captured, well lit, properly time-stamped. 2 images showed hikers. 1 approaching the register from the ridge side, 1 from the lower trail. Both had their backs to the camera approaching the box, presumably signing in. I cross-referenced the timestamps with the register entries. Perfect match. Both were legitimate visitors with matching trailhead check-ins. The camera worked. Motion detection was accurate. Image quality was clear. Timestamps were correct. The system functioned exactly as designed under normal conditions. I felt vindicated. Whatever was signing that register would be captured next time. I had proof of concept. I reinstalled the card and hiked out, feeling like I was finally doing something about the family mystery, rather than just following rules I didn't understand. That confidence lasted exactly 2 more weeks. Second card pull, first week of April. I hiked down in the morning, pulled the SD card, collected the register sheet. The sheet showed 2 normal entries from the past week, both matching trailhead records. But there was a 3rd entry, dated March 29th, 6:52 p.m. A name I didn't recognize. No matching trailhead check-in. No matching backcountry permit. Back at the station, I loaded the card. 9 images. 7 were wildlife deer, a raccoon, a coyote at the edge of the sensor field. All normal, all properly captured. Image 6. Timestamp, March 29th, 6:47 p.m. 5 minutes before the register entry's stated time. The register box lid was open, raised to approximately 45 degrees. The hinged wooden lid that must be physically lifted by hand to access the sheets inside. In the photograph, it was clearly open. The white rectangle of the register sheet was visible inside. No person was in the frame. No hand, no arm, no shadow of a figure, no animal large enough to manipulate a hinged lid. The sensor field covered a 15-foot radius around the box. In the image, that entire radius was empty. Just the forest floor, the post, and the open box. Image 8. Timestamp, March 29th, 6:51 p.m. 4 minutes later. The box lid was still open. Same angle, same emptiness. No closing image was captured. The next image on the card was a deer at 2 a.m. the following night. Somewhere between 6:51 p.m. and 2 a.m., the box closed. No trigger. No image of it happening. I sat at the station desk with the 9 images displayed on my monitor. I went through them one by one. I zoomed in on images 6 and 8 until the pixels blurred. I checked the exposure, the contrast, the shadow patterns. I was looking for anything a blur at the edge, a shape I'd missed, a trick of the infrared lighting. There was nothing. The register box was open. The area around it was empty. And a new entry appeared in handwriting that matched no living visitor. The camera had triggered on motion. It fired because something moved within its sensor field. The 2-second delay meant the photo was captured 2 seconds after the motion was detected. Whatever opened that box was there 2 seconds before the image was taken, and was not there when the shutter fired. 2 seconds. In 2 seconds, something moved into the sensor field, opened a hinged wooden lid, and was gone before the camera captured the frame. Or the thought I kept trying not to have something opened the box that the camera could not photograph. Something present enough to trigger a motion sensor, but absent enough to leave no image. I sat with those images for 3 days. I considered every explanation I could construct. Wind. The box lid is heavy, solid, half-inch cedar with a sheet metal weather cap. I tested it later with a spring scale. It required 4 pounds of force to lift from closed to 45 degrees. No gust in a sheltered hollow would produce that. Animal. Nothing in the frame. And no animal native to these mountains has the dexterity to lift a hinged lid cleanly to a consistent angle without disturbing the post or the surrounding ground. Technical malfunction. The camera worked perfectly for 12 other images on the same card. Timestamps were accurate. Motion detection was confirmed functional by the wildlife captures immediately before and after. Human moving faster than the trigger delay. Possible in theory. But 2 seconds is not a long delay. A person would need to enter the sensor field, open the box, and exit the field in under 2 seconds, while I found no footprints in the soft March soil around the post. I checked. The ground showed deer tracks, fox tracks, and my own boot prints from installation. Nothing else. I had a functioning camera that detected motion, fired correctly, and captured an impossibility. The system worked. The evidence it produced didn't fit any explanation I could build around it. I removed the camera the following week. I told myself it was because I needed the unit for a different monitoring project. That was technically true. I did redeploy it to a campground with a problem bear. But the honest reason was simpler and less comfortable. I removed it because I didn't want more data. I realized, standing at the register box with the camera in my hands, that I was doing exactly what my grandfather did in 1983 when he removed the register itself. Not because the evidence was insufficient, because more evidence wouldn't help. The answer wasn't going to be in the next image or the one after that. The answer was something the camera couldn't give me. I understood then, for the first time, in my body, rather than my mind, why the family rule was about avoidance rather than investigation. Investigation produced evidence. Evidence produced questions. Questions produced engagement. And something about this situation made engagement feel like the wrong direction. I put the camera in my truck. I drove to the station. I filed the images in a folder on my personal drive, not the district system. And I didn't check the Spur 17 register again for 8 months. Dale Purcell retired from Blackwater Ridge in the spring of 2013. He'd been there since 1991, 22 years. Senior ranger for the last decade of that. The man who said morning trail to seasonal hires. The man who never seemed bothered by anything. A week before his last day, Dale found me in the equipment shed doing a radio inventory. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came in and closed the door behind him, which was unusual. It was a warm day, and the shed had no ventilation. He handed me a single sheet of paper, folded once. His handwriting not block print like my grandfather's, but neat cursive. 3 items on the page. First, 2 radio frequencies, listed numerically. Second, a note beside them, no longer active. Decommissioned 2001 with equipment upgrade. Third, 1 sentence at the bottom, underlined. If Blackwater 4 transmits after 10 p.m., do not acknowledge. Mark the time. Tell no one at district. I looked up at Dale. He was watching me the way my father had watched me, that same quality of tired patience. Blackwater 4, I said. Howard Fenn, Dale said. Before your time. Retired 99. Died in his home in 2003. Stroke. I knew the name. Fenn had been a ranger here before Dale. His name was on old maintenance logs. Incident reports from the 90s. A long-serving guy. Well regarded. His call sign still transmits, Dale said. Not often. Maybe 5 or 6 times a year. Always after dark. Always on the old frequency. I asked the obvious question. Equipment malfunction. Old repeater. Signal leak. The frequency was decommissioned when we upgraded in 2001, Dale said. All equipment on that band was physically removed from the district. Repeaters pulled. Nothing broadcasts on it. Nothing can broadcast on it. He paused. Except it does. He told me he'd logged 17 instances over 6 years. Always after 10 p.m. Always Howard Fenn's call sign. Always a standard check-in format, the same phrasing Fenn would have used during his years of service. Then he told me the part that mattered. Tell no one at district. I asked why. Because they already know, he said. And their response is to pretend they don't. For over a year after Dale gave me that paper, I kept a secondary scanner at the station, tuned to the decommissioned frequency. Usually, I turned it off before heading home. But sometimes, on nights when I stayed late with paperwork, I left it on. Low volume, background static. It was a Tuesday in August. I was alone at the station, finishing an incident report, a routine slip and fall on the ridge trail. Nothing serious. It was 10:23 p.m. The scanner hissed quietly on the shelf behind me. The static broke. A voice, male, calm, slightly formal in a way I associated with older rangers, the ones who came up in the 70s and 80s when radio protocol was more rigid. Blackwater 4, checking in. Spur 17 clear. No activity. Over. I set my pen down. I did not turn around to face the scanner. I sat very still and listened to the static fill back in behind the voice. The transmission was clean, not scratchy, not fading in and out the way weak signals do. Close range quality. The kind of clarity you get when someone is broadcasting from within a few miles with a fresh battery and a clear line. I noted the language. Checking in. Not status update. That was the current format, adopted in 2002. Checking in was the pre-2002 phrasing. This transmission was speaking in a language that matched the late 90s. Howard Fenn's era. Spur 17 clear. That was what caught in my throat. Not a generic check-in, a specific trail. The trail. The one I'd spent 5 years quietly documenting. The one the family avoided. The one the register box sat on. The one the camera watched. A dead man's call sign on a dead frequency, reporting a clear status on the trail where dead people's names appeared in register logs. I did not respond. I followed Dale's rule. I wrote the time on a sticky note. 10:23 p.m. And I sat there, listening to static for another 40 minutes until my hands stopped feeling cold. Then I locked the station and drove home. The next morning, I filed a maintenance report through the standard system. I framed it technically. Anomalous signal detected on decommissioned frequency band. Possible equipment interference or repeater leak. Requesting inspection of local relay infrastructure. I expected the usual response timeline, 1 to 2 weeks for non-urgent maintenance queries. Rural district. Small staff. Things move slowly. The response came in 2 days. Email from the Regional Communications Office. 3 sentences. Acknowledged. Frequency decommissioned 2001 per district upgrade. No active equipment on that band. No action required. Disregard future signals on that frequency. 2 days. For a routine maintenance query about radio interference. In a district where a burned-out trailhead light bulb takes 10 days to get a work order. Someone at Communications had flagged my report for priority handling. Someone recognized what I was describing. And their response was not, "Let's investigate," or "Let's check the hardware," or "That's strange. We'll look into it." Their response was disregard. The same word Dale used, the same instruction my father gave about the register names, the same posture my grandfather took toward the whistle. Disregard. Don't engage. Don't pursue. Don't ask. The system knew. Multiple levels of the system knew. And the institutional response at every level was the same. Ignore it. Note it, if you must. But do not treat it as something requiring action. I filed the email. I kept the scanner on. I kept Dale's paper in my desk drawer. And I began to understand something about the structure of the rules I'd inherited. Every rule I'd been given, family or institutional, followed the same fundamental logic. I could see it clearly now, arranged in my mind like entries in a report. The family rule: don't walk the trail after the light changes. Meaning, don't be present when it's active. My father's edition: don't read the register names aloud. Meaning, don't acknowledge what you find. Don't give it your voice. Dale's rule: don't respond to the radio transmission. Meaning, don't answer when it communicates. Don't confirm you're listening. The district's response: disregard future signals. Meaning, don't investigate. Don't pursue understanding. Every instruction from every source pointed in the same direction: away. Every protocol was a form of withdrawal, reduction, decreased contact. These weren't protections against physical danger the way a bear protocol is. A bear protocol tells you what to do when you encounter the bear. These rules never told you what to do if you encountered the thing. They only told you how to avoid encountering it, how to remain beneath its attention, how to exist in proximity without engagement. And the prohibition was always against the same action: responding. Don't answer the whistle. Don't read the names aloud. Don't acknowledge the radio. Don't pursue, investigate, or verify. The rules weren't about protection from harm. They were about maintaining non-engagement, as if whatever operated on Spur 17 and in the Kettle Creek drainage was responsive to human attention, as if noticing it, acknowledging it, engaging with it, those actions change the relationship. Nobody had ever told me what engagement produced. Nobody said what happened on the other side of the boundary. The rules only described the boundary itself. I thought about that for a long time. What happens when you answer something that's been calling? What happens when you engage with something that's been waiting for engagement? I found out in October 2015. Not because I chose to, because the job required it. The call came at 5:45 p.m. on an October Wednesday. A solo hiker male, mid-20s, valid backcountry permit, was 2 hours overdue at the East Trailhead. His emergency contact had called when he missed a scheduled check-in. Standard overdue hiker protocol activated. His permit showed a planned route along the Ridge Trail with a descent via Spur 17 to the lower loop. Last known intended position: somewhere on or near the Kettle Creek connector. I was assigned the Kettle Creek drainage as my search sector. Grid pattern: start at the lower trailhead and work uphill. I knew immediately what that meant. It was October. Sunset had been at 6:12 that evening. By the time I drove to the trailhead, geared up, and began my grid, it would be past 6:30. Full dark by 7 o'clock. I requested reassignment. Told my supervisor I'd take any other sector: the ridge, the lakeshore, the campground perimeter. I didn't explain why. I just asked. He denied it. The drainage was the highest probability zone based on the hiker's stated route. Putting anyone else there when I was already closest would waste response time. You're 10 minutes from that trailhead, Caleb. Get moving. He was right. Tactically, operationally, professionally, he was right. The hiker could be injured, could be hypothermic. October nights at 3,400 feet drop into the 30s. Every minute mattered. I drove to the trailhead. I sat in my truck for 19 seconds before getting out. My GPS tracked that stop later. I checked. I don't remember sitting there. I remember walking continuously from the truck to the trail. But the data says I paused. 19 seconds of stillness before I stepped onto Spur 17 in the dark for the first time in my life. I entered the trail at 6:38 p.m., headlamp on, radio on, calling the hiker's name at 20-second intervals, standard search protocol, loud, clear, directional calls with pauses to listen for response. The rhododendron tunnel closed around me within the first 100 yards. My headlamp caught the waxy leaves on both sides, a green wall pressing close. The trail dropped away beneath my boots with the same steady grade I remembered from every morning check. But night made it different. The canopy overhead sealed the sky into fragments. The headlamp beam was the only light in a world. Everything beyond its reach was absolute black, not the soft darkness of a clear night under stars. The hard darkness of a hollow with no skyline. The kind of dark that feels solid. I called the hiker's name, listened, called again. The creek sound rose as I descended, the way it always did. But under it, or around it, in the spaces between water sounds, I noticed the same silence I'd noticed in 2009. No insects, no night birds, no rustling, and something else. My footsteps echoed. Not off the cliff face to the east, the sound was wrong for that. Not from behind me, from ahead. Every time my boot hit the trail, a second impact came back. Same weight, same cadence, from maybe 30 yards below me on the trail. A measured delay, not instantaneous, like a natural echo. About 2 seconds behind each step. When I walked, it walked. When I stopped, it stopped, but 2 seconds later, as if it was receiving my movements and reproducing them at a fixed delay. I stood still for 10 seconds, 15. The echo did not continue. It was not a lingering acoustic artifact. It stopped when I stopped, precisely 2 seconds after my last step. I resumed walking. 2 seconds later, the echo resumed. I am not going to pretend I handled this with complete composure. My jaw was clenched tight enough that my molars ached the next morning. But I kept walking, because somewhere in this hollow, a 25-year-old hiker was potentially injured and waiting for help. That obligation was bigger than my discomfort. That's the job. I called the hiker's name again. My voice went out into the dark. No response came from ahead, but the echo of my footsteps continued. I was 2/3 of the way to the creek when my radio activated. Not on the search frequency. I had 2 channels, programmed the active SAR channel and the standard dispatch band. The sound that came through was on neither. A burst of static, brief. Then a voice. Caleb. My name. Clear. Close range quality. The same male voice I'd heard on the scanner 14 months earlier. Calm, slightly formal. The cadence of an older generation. A pause. 2 seconds. East Bank. Below the second crossing. He's there. Then static. Then silence. I stood on the trail with my radio in my hand. The footstep echo had stopped. The hollow was silent, except for the creek. My headlamp beam pointed straight ahead at empty trail. I looked at the radio. My unit was a modern Motorola, digital, encrypted, programmed only with active district frequencies. The decommissioned analog band that Dale's scanner received should not be receivable on this hardware. The frequencies aren't compatible. The modulation type is different. It's like receiving AM on an FM receiver. Technically impossible, without modification. The voice had come through anyway, and it had given me directions, specific, actionable. East Bank, below the second crossing. I stood there for what my GPS later showed was 45 seconds. Then I resumed walking, downhill, toward the second crossing, because a hiker was missing, and I had information, impossible information, from an impossible source, and the only alternative was to pretend I hadn't heard it, and continue a standard grid that might take hours. I followed the directions. I am not proud of that decision, and I am not ashamed of it. I made it because a life was potentially at stake, and the information was specific enough to act on. The footstep echo did not return. East Bank, below the second crossing. I found him there. The hiker was wedged in a root tangle beside the creek, conscious, but barely hypothermic, disoriented, his right ankle swollen to twice its normal size, probably a severe sprain or fracture. He'd slipped on the creek rocks during his crossing, fallen into the root system, and couldn't extract himself. His phone was dead. His whistle was somewhere in the water downstream. I stabilized him. Emergency blanket. Ankle immobilized with a SAM splint. Radio call for extraction helicopter was en route from the regional base within 20 minutes. I stayed with him, talking, keeping him awake, monitoring his temperature. He was airlifted at 8:15 p.m., mild hypothermia, fractured lateral malleolus, full recovery expected. I wrote my incident report that night at the station. I described a systematic grid search of the Kettle Creek drainage, East Bank sector. I attributed the find to standard search methodology, working the high probability zone based on terrain and the hiker's stated route. I did not mention the radio transmission. I did not mention the voice or the directions or the impossible frequency. I filed a clean report with a clean explanation, and I went home. I did not sleep that night. Not because of the search, not because of the hiker, because of what I had done. I had answered. Not verbally, I hadn't keyed the radio and spoken back. But I had followed the directions. I had taken the information and acted on it. I had engaged. After 5 years of learning that every rule in every system said, "Don't engage," I had engaged. In the weeks that followed, the scanner at the station began picking up brief static bursts on the dead frequency. Not transmissions, not voices. Just momentary breaks in the silence, at irregular intervals. Sometimes twice in an evening. Sometimes nothing for a week. But present, checking, as if something on the other end was waiting to see if anyone would respond. I did not respond, but I had already responded. The directions, the find, that was response enough. Something had spoken to me, and I had listened, and now I could not unlisten. I had crossed the boundary that 3 generations of my family had maintained, and I didn't yet understand what that would cost. 2 years passed. I continued working Blackwater Ridge. I followed all the rules, family and institutional. I walked Spur 17 only in mornings. I filed register sheets without reading them closely. I did not respond to the occasional static bursts on the dead frequency. I did my job, and I maintained the boundaries. But something had shifted in those 2 years that I only recognized in retrospect. It was subtle, behavioral. In December 2017, I was in the district archive at the regional office in Marion. Routine work researching a trail easement for a boundary dispute with an adjacent landowner. I was pulling property records from filing cabinets when I found it. A manila envelope, sealed with institutional packing tape, yellowed and brittle with age, stamped across the front in faded red ink. "Do not open Hollis personal." My grandfather's name was on the return line. Earl Hollis. The same careful block printing I recognized from his old logbooks. The envelope was misfiled. It was in a folder labeled Easement Records, East Boundary, 1978 to 1985. Not personnel files, not incident records, not anywhere a personal document should have been stored. I held it and understood immediately that the misfiling was deliberate. My grandfather had placed this where it would be preserved by the institutional filing system, but never found by anyone searching for it intentionally. An easement folder for a completed boundary dispute from 40 years ago. One of the least accessed files in the entire archive. You could work this district for a career and never pull that folder. I had pulled it by accident, or by whatever passes for accident in this story. The tape crackled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded once. My grandfather's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere, the same block capitals I'd seen in decades of logbooks and field notes. Neat, deliberate, unhurried. The date at the top, June 14th, 1974. The entry was structured like an incident report. Location, time, conditions, events. The language was measured the way all of my grandfather's writing was measured. Professional, precise, except for the last 2 lines. He described a search. A hunter overdue from a backcountry trip near Kettle Creek. November, so the days were short. My grandfather entered Spur 17 at 4:45 p.m. after the light change. He noted this explicitly, violated personal protocol due to SAR urgency. He descended the trail in fading light. He described the silence same as mine, same as always. No animal sound, no bird call. The hollow closed around him. Then the voice. He described it precisely. Male, calm, formal, from no identifiable direction, not ahead, not behind, not from the cliff face, present in the air the way the creek sound was present, ambient rather than located. The voice gave him directions, north side, above the third pool, in the rocks. My grandfather followed the directions. He found the hunter, dead. 3 days deceased from exposure, wedged in a rock crevice above the third pool on Kettle Creek. His grandfather documented the position, radioed for body recovery, and hiked out. Then the second part of the note. As he climbed back up Spur 17 in the dark, the voice came again. Same quality, same presence, not a shout, a statement, as if spoken from immediately beside him, from the air itself. Now you'll come back. 3 words. That was all. Then the normal sounds of the hollow returned creek, wind, the distant call of a barred owl, as if a curtain had been pulled aside and then replaced. My grandfather's final 2 lines on the page were these. After this date, I have returned to the hollow 41 times without operational necessity. I recognize this as aberrant behavior. I am developing protocols for distance. And below that, separated by a space, don't go looking for what answers you. Not wisdom, not a folk saying, a warning written by a man who recognized that something had hooked into his behavior and was drawing him back. The family phrase I'd grown up hearing repeated at dinner tables, in truck cabs, at Sunday gatherings, was the compressed residue of a specific documented encounter. And the encounter had a mechanism. Help creates return. The voice helps you. You accept the help. And then you come back, again and again, drawn by something you can't name and didn't choose. My grandfather spent 15 years building distance. The rules, the morning-only protocol, the register removal, the non-engagement instructions were his methods of resistance. Not against fear, against attraction. I sat in the archive with the paper in my hands and the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. And I understood what had happened to me in October 2015. The voice gave me directions. I followed them. I found the hiker. The help was real. And since that night, for 2 full years, I had been changing. I pulled my patrol logs from 2016 and 2017. I'd never looked at them in aggregate before. Never stepped back to see the pattern. In the 2 years since the search, I had driven the fire road past the Spur 17 trailhead 43 times. 43 individual, GPS-tracked passages on a road that served no other purpose in my patrol area. More than double the frequency of any other fire road in my assigned sector. I hadn't noticed. I'd always had a reason each time, checking a culvert, inspecting a gate, driving to the far campground. But the route always took me past that trailhead. Every time. As if my navigation defaulted there without conscious decision. I thought about other changes, small ones. The way I'd started leaving the scanner on later at night. The way I'd begun taking morning walks on Spur 17 more frequently than the schedule required. The way I found myself standing at the register box some mornings, with no clear memory of deciding to go there. Just arriving. As if my feet knew the way, and my mind was catching up. 41 times, my grandfather wrote. 41 returns without operational necessity. And he recognized it as aberrant. 43 drives past the trailhead. How many morning walks I didn't count. How many times I lingered at the junction without tracking the minutes. The pull wasn't fear. That's what made it invisible. If I'd been afraid, I would have noticed. Fear is obvious. Fear announces itself. But this was quieter, warmer, something closer to familiarity, to belonging. The way you drive past a childhood home, not because you want something from it, but because your body remembers it and turns the wheel without asking. I was doing what my grandfather described, coming back, without choosing to, without understanding why. The help had been accepted, and the return had begun, and I hadn't recognized it for 2 years because it felt natural. It felt like mine. That was the worst part. I couldn't tell the difference between my choices and its influence. And maybe there was no difference anymore. I submitted my resignation in March 2018. The paperwork cited personal reasons. My supervisor asked if there was anything the district could do. I told him no. I thanked him for 11 years of good work. And I meant it. I moved to a town 4 hours east. Close enough that my family connections still held. Far enough that the mountains were a line on the horizon, not a presence overhead. I don't hike anymore. That's not dramatic. I don't say it with grief or self-pity. It's practical. The way a recovering alcoholic doesn't keep whiskey in the house. Not because the bottle is dangerous by itself. Because proximity is the mechanism. Because being near the thing is how the thing works on you. I don't keep a scanner. I don't monitor radio frequencies. I don't work in wilderness. I don't go to places where the tree line closes overhead, and the silence sits in the hollows, the way water sits in bowls. These are distance protocols, the same kind my grandfather developed after 1974. He spent 15 years building separation. I built mine faster because I had his example. I still dream about the trail sometimes. Not nightmares, nothing chases me, nothing threatens. I'm just walking, downhill, through the rhododendron tunnel, the creek sound rising, and somewhere ahead, footsteps matching mine with a 2-second delay, keeping pace, waiting. I wake up from those dreams feeling rested. That's the detail I never tell anyone. The dreams are peaceful. The pull is gentle. Whatever is in that hollow, it doesn't feel hostile in the dream. It feels like home. And that is exactly why I stay 4 hours away. My sister's son, Daniel, was hired at Blackwater Ridge last spring. 22 years old, biology degree, eager for field work. The kind of young man who sees a remote posting as an adventure rather than an exile. When my sister told me, I felt something settle in my chest, like a stone dropping into still water. The same district, the same trail system, the same 90 miles of path that 3 Hollis men had walked before him. I drove to see him the weekend before his first shift, found him in the parking lot of the ranger station, loading his truck with gear, bright-eyed, excited, the way I must have looked in 2007. I stood with him for 10 minutes, asked about his training, his housing, his assignment. He told me his patrol sector included the eastern drainage, Spur 17, and the Kettle Creek corridor. Of course it did. I told him one thing before I left, kept my voice casual, conversational, the way Dale Purcell sounded when he said, "Morning Trail." Spur 17, the Kettle Creek connector. It's a morning trail. Don't walk it after the light changes. He looked at me with that half-smile young people have when older relatives say something that sounds like superstition. Polite. Humoring. "Why?" he asked, and I heard my father's voice come out of my own mouth. The same cadence, same tired patience, the same words. "Don't go looking for what answers you." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask further. I don't know if he'll follow the rule. I don't know if any 22-year-old would. Given no reason and no evidence, I didn't. For 7 years, and then I did. I drove home that afternoon with the window down and the radio off, and the mountains getting smaller in my mirror. I'd said both too much and not enough. The same as every Hollis man before me. The same insufficient warning. The same silence where the explanation should be. The cycle was either continuing or starting over. I couldn't tell the difference. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirits. I don't believe in ancient mountain curses or demons or portals to other dimensions. I've heard all those explanations suggested by people I've told fragments of this story to, and none of them fit what I experienced. They're too narrative, too human in their logic. Whatever operates in the Kettle Creek drainage is not something from a story we already know how to tell. What I believe is simpler and less satisfying. I believe something exists in that hollow that interacts with human presence according to consistent behavioral patterns. It produces sound, A whistle, a voice, footsteps. It interacts with physical objects, register boxes, radio equipment. It demonstrates knowledge of specific people names, positions, needs. And it has been doing these things with documented consistency for at least 60 years across 3 generations of direct observation. The rules work. I believe that fully. Distance works. Non-engagement works. Morning walks produce no anomalies. Silence on the radio produces no escalation. Avoidance of the register produces no new evidence. The boundaries function exactly as designed. What I cannot resolve is the mechanism I experienced. The help, the attraction, the slow gravitational pull that follows contact. My grandfather documented it. I experienced it. And I suspect, without evidence, without documentation, on pure instinct, that the 4 missing persons whose names appeared on that register all experienced it too. All accepted help. All came back, again and again, until they didn't come back out. I don't know that. I can't prove it. But I believe it, the way I believe the rules work through pattern recognition across enough data points that belief becomes irrelevant. The evidence supports the conclusion, regardless of what I want to be true. Blackwater Ridge is still operating. The trails are still open. Spur 17 is still on the map. Hikers walk it every day in summer without incident. Nothing happens to visitors who pass through in daylight. Nothing happens to anyone who doesn't engage. The rules hold, the boundaries hold. The thing is patient. It has been patient for 60 years that I know of, probably longer. On my last morning at the station, clearing out my desk, I checked the Spur 17 register one final time. Old habit. Couldn't help myself. One new entry, no name written, just a date, March 12th, 2018. My resignation date. Nothing else. Just the date, in no handwriting I recognized, centered on the line where a signature should be. As if something noted my departure, recorded it, filed it away the same way I'd filed everything else. I put the sheet back in the box and closed the lid and walked away. That brings me to last month. Daniel called on a Sunday evening. 20 minutes of normal conversation. How the job was going. What he thought of the campground hosts. Whether his housing was adequate. Family talk. Easy. Then, near the end, his voice shifted. Just slightly. The way someone's voice shifts when they're about to ask something they've been holding for the whole conversation. Uncle Caleb, that trail you mentioned. Spur 17. I waited. I was walking past the junction yesterday evening, maybe 5:30. The light was getting kind of gold, you know? That time of day. I knew. And I heard something weird, down in a hollow, like a whistle. 3 blasts, pretty clear. Probably just a bird or something, right? Or maybe the wind through the rocks. I closed my eyes. I was sitting in my kitchen, 4 hours east of those mountains, and I could see the junction perfectly. The trail sign, the rhododendron tunnel dropping away, the amber light going horizontal through the canopy. And somewhere below, 3 clean notes rising out of a hollow where no bird makes that sound. Probably just the wind, I said. Daniel laughed. Yeah, that's what I figured. Weird, though. We talked for another minute about nothing. He hung up. I set my phone on the counter and stood there in my kitchen, listening to the silence. He's going to go back. I know he is, because he's 22 and the sound was interesting, and nobody has given him a reason good enough to override his curiosity. He's going to hear it again, and then he's going to walk down that trail to find the source, and something in the hollow is going to help him with something, and then he's going to come back, and back, and back, and one day, maybe, he'll call me again, and his voice will sound like my father's voice sounded, tired, patient, resigned, and he'll tell his children the same thing I told him, in the same insufficient words, with the same silence where the explanation should be. Or maybe he won't call. Maybe he'll be a name on a register sheet 20 years from now, in handwriting that matches his own, on a trail that never needs clearing. I hope it's the first one. I hope the rules are enough. The rules are all I have to give him